Hi, my name is Christopher Whitaker. I'm the Code for America Brigade Captain for Chicago, Illinois, and this is Civic Hacking 101. Civic Hacking 101 is just a quick 15-minute orientation course that I do every Tuesday at the OpenGov Hack Nights in Chicago, Illinois. We hold a hack night every Tuesday at 1871, which is one of Chicago's premier co-working spaces for tech startups. I started getting into doing the 101 course because of my experience of what happened to me when I first got into tech. I am not a coder. I don't code, I don't know Ruby, I don't know R, I don't know Python, or any of the coding languages. So when I first started going to hackathons and developer events, they kept talking about Ruby and Python, and my first guess was, why are they talking about jewelry and snakes? So about this time last year, we started doing this Civic Hacking 101 course just to get people familiar with the lingo so they wouldn't be completely lost whenever we started going around from project to project. My background is I was a government employee working for the state of Illinois during the last recession. So when someone went to the office to get help with their unemployment claim, or if they had a problem receiving their unemployment insurance, I would be the person they went to see. So when I first got to the office, I powered up my computer, waited about 5 minutes because the computer's from 1995, pulled everything up and discovered that the system that I was using to administer unemployment benefits during the recession was built in 1973, which was crazy. Nothing would happen real time. Everything happened in an overnight process, and in order to make sure that everything you did went through the next day, you had to print out about a ream of paper and go through it line by line to make sure that nothing rejected. Because if something rejects, people don't get paid, people come back to the office kind of cranky, and rightly so. So I started getting into technology as a way to try to find ways to make my own job better. And that's how I discovered Code for America and how I came to start doing consulting for the Smart Chicago Collaborative and started getting into civic hacking. So I always start off with saying that I don't code because you don't actually need to know any coding to do civic hacking. So that's lesson one. Don't be afraid if you don't know how to code. The other big thing I start with is data. Data is fuel for civic innovation. Here in Chicago, the city has all of their data on the data.cityofchicago.org data portal. Anytime they tow a car, fill a pothole, inspect a restaurant, it all goes onto this data portal. Now, it didn't used to be like this. It used to be, before the days of the open data policy, that whenever a city employee did anything, they would type it on a computer, but it would stay on the computer. And the only way to figure out if something got done or not is if you called City Hall or filed a FOIA or a Freedom of Information Act request. It was very complicated, long drawn out. It was hard to figure out what was going on. Now, everything is pretty much in real time. There's a data set that shows potholes patched for the last 7 days, energy usage, traffic congestion by segment, all kinds of stuff is now on this data portal. So one of the data sets that gets updated on a regular basis is towed vehicles. Anytime the city tows your car, either you're parked where you're not supposed to be, it's getting over 2 inches of snow and they need the snow lanes cleared, whenever they tow your car, they'll put all this information into this data set. But as you can see, it's a giant spreadsheet in the sky. It's not very user-friendly. You kind of have to already know about it in order to access it. So it's not the best thing in the world. So a guy named Scott Robin built a website called wasmycartowed.com. And it's just one sentence: my car with license plate blah 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 was parked in Chicago and I can't find it. Was it towed or relocated? Yes, your car was towed to this address on this day. Call this number to get it back. That is civic hacking in a nutshell. It's taking data that's been opened by the government and using it to either educate about an issue or solve a civic problem. It's not just the city of Chicago that's released data. Cook County government has a data portal, the state of Illinois, and then there's thousands upon thousands of data sets on data.gov, which is the home of the federal government's data. So you can go to topics and go, I'm interested in health data. And then it's going to take you to the health portion of the site, which is going to give you all the health data that the federal government has open. One of the better things about being in Chicago is the person who manages this portal, Tom Schenk, is a very active member of the Civic Hacking community. And so he's on Twitter at Chicago CDO. He's a regular attendee of the Hack Nights, so whenever we have a question about a particular data set, or we want to know how to access the data portal or to use their API, we can get an answer pretty quickly. And that's one of the big advantages that Chicago has. A little bit more about using the data portal. The data portal is based on the Socrata platform, and Socrata has an API that lets essentially your web app talk to the data portal directly. And so instead of having to have your own database, you can just pull the data straight from the data portal. So that's all about open data. The other part that you'll hear us talk about a lot at Hack Nights and various events is open source. Open source software is kind of like taking an open book test when you're in class. Everybody could see everybody's answers. You can sort of see how people got to the answers, and if you needed to, you could just look things up on how people did this. Same thing with open source. This is an app called Chicago Flu Shots, and it's an app that helps people find where to get a free flu shot near them. This site has both flu shots from private vendors and free flu shots given by the city. This whole site came about because the city actually went to one of our Hack Nights and said, flu season's coming up, we're concerned it's going to be a particularly rough one. We'd love to find a way to make it easier for people to find a flu shot. So Tom Kompare built this site, and when he was done, he threw it all on GitHub. Well, a couple of weeks later, my counterpart, Harlan Weber in Boston, shoots me an email that said, hey, a couple of weeks ago you were talking about this flu shot app. We've just declared a public health emergency because the flu has gotten so bad here in Boston. We'd really like to use the app. So I directed him to the Chicago Flu Shots repository, introduced him to Tom, and because it's open source, they were able to redeploy it very easily. GitHub has something called a fork. So think about a family tree. Mom and dad. One branch is the mom, one branch is the daughter, one branch is the son, one branch is the other son, and they form forks of the family tree. Same thing with GitHub. So Boston took this, made a fork, and in less than 36 hours, they had deployed their own version of the flu shot app. It didn't cost them anything but time. Didn't have to go through this great big complicated procurement process. They didn't have to reinvent the wheel. They just needed to go to Tom's repository and fork it. GitHub also has another powerful feature called a pull request. So when Boston got a hold of the app, Boston made a couple of changes and then went back to Tom and said, hey Tom, we think we've made some changes to your app. We think you'll like them. We would like you to pull our changes into your app. That's called a pull request. Because we're a very collaborative organization, a lot of times that's just how we work. One person will work on the main repository, someone else will work on a piece, somebody else will work on a piece, and they'll all pull their changes back into the main repository. Because a lot of our Civic apps have been open source, we've been able to use apps developed in Boston and vice versa. We've been able to see apps that were deployed in all sorts of cities and kind of adjusted to their own specific needs. A good example is Adopt a Sidewalk or Adopt a Hydrant from the city of Boston. Whenever it snows, the hydrants get covered in snow and they get frozen. So when there's a fire, you have to go out and try to break the ice to get to the fire hydrant. So the City of Boston has the Adopt a Hydrant app that lets you adopt a hydrant and say, you know, I'm going to name this hydrant, and then every time it snows, I'm going to shovel it out. Well, that worked great for Boston. So Honolulu actually redeployed it as Adopt a Siren. So Honolulu has tsunami sirens, but they tend to get the batteries taken out of them. So they implemented an Adopt a Siren solution, and so now whenever they do the test of the sirens and one of them isn't working, somebody tells City Hall and they can go out and fix it so that, God forbid, if there ever was a tsunami, they'd be prepared. The other thing about GitHub is it has what's called an issue function. So even if I don't know anything about coding, I can still see and still work on a project through these issue features. So I can add a new issue. I can say, hey, I was looking at the site. I can say, you know, I found a bug on the site. This, and that. And I can submit a new issue. And I can actually start a conversation around that issue, even though I don't know a thing of code. So this is GitHub. I know GitHub's kind of complicated to understand when you first look at it, but it's very useful. We use it for almost all of our projects. If you'd like to get more familiar with GitHub, when you go to GitHub's site and you scroll to the bottom, you're going to see this training link. If you click the training link, it's going to bring you to sort of a online tutorial that can get you familiar with GitHub in about 15 minutes, and you could do it straight from your browser. So if you want to know more about GitHub, I would definitely check out the tutorial on their site. So the other aspect of civic hacking is not just about data, it's not just about coding, it's not just about open source. There's also a community organizing element around this. Admittedly, we're a geeky bunch, but if we're geeks making things for geeks, we're not always really solving the problem. So what we try to do is we try to partner up with people in nonprofits, in government agencies, in community organizations, and build stuff around their needs, their challenges. So one of my favorite examples is a site called schoolcuts.org. About a year ago, Chicago Public School System had slated about 70 some odd schools that they were thinking of closing or consolidating into smaller, they were either consolidating them into bigger schools or they were closing them altogether. This upset a lot of parents, and rightly so. It's a big deal. It's very disruptive. And so when parents would try to get more information about what was happening, Chicago Public Schools had the data, but it was scattered in 7 different places. It wasn't very easy to figure out. Some of it was buried in Excel sheets, some of it in PDFs. So what some civic hackers at Hack Night did was they partnered with someone from one of the parent organizations and built schoolcuts.org. So when you go to the site, you can click the school you're interested, for example, Yale, and you can get all the information you'd need to understand what's happening with the school. You'd see, basic information, you'd see demographics, 93% low income, you'd get a map of what's around the school. You'd see information on why CPS considers this an underutilized school, student performance, what category rating that CPS gives the school, 1 being the best, 3 being the worst, what's happening with the school, everything you could possibly need to know about that school. So they went to the parents, and parents loved this. They ate it up. This was giving them information that was needed. It was focusing on the data, and the site was set up in a way that was neutral. So it wasn't trying to be pro-school closings or anti-school closing. It was just presenting the data as it was. So when they went back to the parents, they didn't just stop and say, oh, we made this thing, it's great, wonderful, and leave it. They went back to the parents, they asked, so what else can we do? What other questions do you have? How can we make this better? And so they said, you know, they're talking about closing our school and sending my student to another school that I know nothing about. So they went back and created a method of comparing one school to the other. So Harvard is the receiving school for students from Yale. So they have a link to Harvard so that you can get all the information on them. You can also compare the schools side by side. One of the issues was that the Chicago public school system had promised that your student would go to a better school. But in a lot of cases, they were all going to Category 3 schools, which was the worst rated schools. And so this upset parents. And so what CPS did was they released these guidelines to say, okay, if they meet these criteria, then they fit the bill. And so what the team did was they sort of did an explainer talking about what CPS considers a better school. They then showed each school side by side so you can see sort of exactly what was going on. And this helped parents a lot. Parents were printing out screenshots of the app, bringing it to school closing hearings, and sort of waving it around going, you know, you're not sending my kid to that much better school. Because they had the data in front of them, they could argue the point. And they didn't stop there. They went back and asked, you know, what else can we do? And one of those things was, you know, in some of these neighborhoods, they're majority Spanish speaking. So they translated the site to Spanish. Another example is a site called Expunge.io. Expunge.io is a website for helping determine if you're eligible to have your juvenile record expunged. So you take this quiz. No, you know, I can say, you know, I was arrested, but I didn't go to court. I'm over 18. And hey, I'm eligible to apply for juvenile expungement in Illinois under the subsection. So now I can fill out this form, and it'll get me in touch with an organization called Legal Aid Fund Chicago, and they will help me file a petition to get my juvenile record expunged. The juvenile expungement doesn't get used nearly enough to cover all the people with juvenile records. And so this is a very simple way that people can figure out if they're eligible for expungement and connect them directly to those who can help them with that process. This app came about through the Juvenile Justice Council from MICFA Challenge. MICFA Challenge is a nonprofit organization in Chicago that works with youth. And they had worked with Smart Chicago for a summer program called Civic Summer. And during that Civic Summer program, the Juvenile Justice Council designed this app. They came up with the idea, they talked about what it would need to get it done, and then on Smart Chicago's end, they connected them with the developer, they connected them with legal aid, and they worked out a process to sort of connect all the dots so that whenever a user came on to the site, they could answer the questions and then get routed to someone who could help them. The code part of this was not the most important part of this site. The most important part of this site was talking to the people sort of in the front line who do this work every day and figuring out how to use the technology to help support their mission. So it's not just about coding. There's a lot of community organizing that goes on with that. And it's more than just web development. There's people who need to know how to write, need to know how to be able to explain civic issues in plain English, designers, people who know about issues, whether they be transportation, education, juvenile justice, crime. There's all sorts of subject areas that are involved in civic life that civic apps need in order to be good, effective civic apps. And so that's part of what we try to do in Chicago at both the Hack Nights and Smart Chicago Collaborative and through Code for America. This is the Hack Night website, opengovhacknight.org. You can see a list of our events, what we're talking about. See, here's Expunge.io. You can take a look at all the projects that we've done over the years. This site has both projects from Smart Chicago, from OpenCity apps, and once it loads, it'll show you the people involved with those apps, where their open source repository is on GitHub, and kind of what the name of the app is, and everything you may need to know about those specific projects. When you click on one of the contributors, it'll take you straight to their GitHub profile, so you can see their contact information. See, there's DerekEder.com. Derek Eder is one of the hosts of the OpenGov Hack Night. Other groups in Chicago that are heavily involved, Smart Chicago Collaborative, which I'm a consultant for. We run a project called Civic Works, in which we actually pay developers to build civic apps, or we utilize an app from Civic Startup. One of our projects is we're working with a company called Local Data and a nonprofit called the Southwest Organizing Project to do surveys of neighborhoods to identify all the abandoned and foreclosed buildings. And so instead of the Southwest Organizing Project going out there with pad and paper and filling everything out by hand, they can now use their smartphones. And this helps SWAP collect all the data, have it in one place, and then SWAP will take a look at that data and figure out, which house should we work on first to get it renovated and revitalized and a family moved in to help spur the redevelopment of the entire neighborhood. Another group that you should get involved with if you're interested in doing this kind of work in your city is Code for America. I am a brigade captain, and brigades all over the country in Boston, Detroit, Oakland, we're all meeting regularly to help spur civic innovation in our communities. So if you want to get involved in the brigade, you can go to brigade.codeforamerica.org and sign up and get in the loop. If you have any questions, my name is Christopher Whitaker. You can find me on Twitter at Civic Whitaker. Love to hear feedback. Love to answer any questions. And I hope this helped. Thank you very much.